Welcome back to part 2 of the little guy ripper build, and today we're going to be finishing this guy up, and I've got everything painted and detailed and I'm super excited to get the body work on here. But before we get into that, even get distracted by any of that, I want to readdress a few little issues that came up in part 1, all of which we solved in part 1, but I think I'm going to go back and tweak those just a little bit. So let's review this functional slider that we finished up in part 1. So this has a Nano Beast 2.0 from MOFO RC with his aluminum motor mount. So we've got that in the forward facing position, and we've got Little Guy Racing's new trimmer servo on MOFO RC's best servo mount ever. And then we've got Little Guy Racing's billet Super 8 axles with CVDs, and we've got their billet steering link and billet ripper links. And then the plastic here is just part of the ripper kit, the transmission and the rails. And then we're finishing that out with Hot Racing's 43mm long travel oil shocks. So those are nice and smooth. So that's kind of the rundown of the chassis right there. A few little issues that arose in part 1 was basically switching out this best servo mount ever from the EMAX servo tray this was designed around, changed this upper link geometry. So I actually needed some longer upper links, and so you can see there I adjusted those out to get this servo sitting where I needed it caster wise. So that was the first little tweak. The second was with this plastic transmission skid. I ended up using longer hardware, I think in every mounting hole here, even for the links to the chassis. Was finally able to get some bite on the chassis, but you know, it's 3D printed stuff, so just not a huge issue, but another little thing. And then the last would be the shocks. Because this is a realistic chassis, you don't have these extreme shock mount positions to really lean those shocks in a crazy amount. And because these are longer shocks, I'm sitting fairly high because of that. So that's another issue I may want to address here, is lowering this ride height down just overall. So with that review here, let's take a look at what we're going to do to the chassis first off. So something I totally missed on Little Guy's site when I bought the kit was they actually offer a billet transmission skid. So because this guy is directional in the frame, you can't flip the skid. In the billet version, they offer a symmetrical transmission mounting option, so you can flip the motor transmission on the plate. So that is awesome for any future builders. It's not going to affect me, not going to change the orientation of this motor. The second thing, this again existed when I got the trimmer servo, but only in the 3D printed plastic. So now they've just released the billet trimmer servo mount. So I picked that up, and you can see here quite a bit different looking than traditional mounts, and we're going to get this out and compare it to the MOFO mount shortly. But that hopefully will allow me to actually put back in these ripper upper links as intended, and maybe get this whole system working here, and I'll be able to save those links, those adjustable ones, for something else. And then the last item here, I believe these are called AFIBs. They're from MOFO RC. They're similar to flex blades, but they allow you many more shock mounting options. So the hope is to be able to drape these across and move the shock mount position further down and back, and lower this down on the front and rear. And potentially I may have to pop in the soft springs. I believe these are mediums all the way around, and that combo hopefully may get me riding just a little bit lower. So I think we're going to look at those kind of 3 main areas on the chassis, and then we'll get to the fun part of the body, the paintwork, the wheels and tires, and then we'll get the electronics buttoned up and have this thing running. All right, got that skid installed, no problem. I did go back to using the 4mm long hardware on the skid to chassis as they recommend, and that seemed to get in there and bite and tighten down just fine. So that is looking good, and as you can see, I've got the servo pulled and the servo tray. So I've got them both sized up here, basically by where they sit on the diff, and you can see MOFO sits a little further forward, but even with this link here on the furthest back position, you can see here on the little guy racing there's 3 holes for your link. So I've got it adjusted to give me the longest link, and I'm still short of where I had these adjusted for the MOFO tray. So that tells me this is going to be leaning the servo back more than I had it previously. So I think I'm going to go ahead and put the little guy servo mount on there and just see where we end up. And if it's not workable, then I'll go back to this setup here that is workable. But pretty nice little aluminum mount. Of course, the posts are not adjustable, but they give you 3, so you can actually mount with 2 per side in the actual holes instead of the tab. So most of the time you're mounting with 1 screw per side, so you can get a little bit more secure with your mount. And then of course, like I said, you've got the 3 options for the back. And nice profile cutaway, very slim line, similar to MOFO's, but just as minimal as you can get it with enough bite for your links in the back. So that's kind of the servo tray there. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that in, get the servo mounted, and just see what that does with the overall geometry, and then we'll be a little closer to buttoning this thing up. Well, this is looking like a no-go. So this did end up leaning the servo back. You can see there it does have some lean to it at full compression. But the issue I found was I was having some problem tightening it down, and you see I've loosened those screws back out, but it's still, the servo is kind of stuck in the mount. But you can see the horn is hitting the link, and I already had to move the link up 1 position there because this sits lower. So I don't know, this, to me, this is, it's almost like these weren't perfectly made for each other. It's definitely not the perfect thing for the ripper. I think I'm going to go back to the setup that I had prior, and that seemed to get the geometry exactly where I wanted. And I can't have that servo horn hitting the link there. So I don't know, but I'll just save this mount and use it on a different build where I've got different geometry, and maybe it will come in handy. I'll just have to not use these little guy ripper upper links. So anyways, a little bit of time wasted there. We're going to put it back to how it was and get the motor back in, and then we'll take a look at these shocks. All right, now that I got this thing off, I was able to pull the servo off the tray pretty easy. And I think the source of the tension, if you look down the holes, there's a little misalignment. So if I squeeze one side down and it's perfect, the other side's off a little. And the same thing, I believe that's because the inside edges of this tray have a radius here. It's a little too large, so it just starts early, stops this from seating down far enough. So you could Dremel that off and this would drop in perfectly, but you can get it to attach. I just put in all 4 screws, just kind of started them and then kind of worked them down evenly and snugged it on. But there was a little tension in doing that. And then of course the bottom of the servo horn actually hitting the link, and that's not going to work. So gonna end up saving this for a different application, but luckily problem is already solved. So I'm gonna get this switched in and let's move on. All right, got this chassis reassembled. So we're not gonna be using the plastic tray. I'm gonna save this sweet adjustable link point servo mount for another build. Of course, we're not going to be able to use those ripper links, but got ourselves a nice looking chassis here. And as you can see, I went ahead and installed those AFIBs for the shock mounts. So on the rear, this actually shifted it back and downward, so I can actually get a lot deeper into the frame there with the shock leaned. And the front, it really didn't lower the shock mount. If anything, it may have raised it up a little, but it moved it forward. Again, gives me a nice lean there. And then they give me just a little bit of dropout. I've got a little bit on the front, and I've got a little bit more on the rear. And I've got this mounted here in the threaded holes. So on each end, there's 2 threaded holes, and in the center, there's 2 kind of pivot holes. So I'm using one of the threaded holes to mount to, and then the end one, of course, for the shock. And then on the front, I've got it mounted in one of the pivot holes to the actual axle, and that was to actually pull it back, because if I had it mounted similar to this rear one, it actually hit the steering link at full lock. It came into contact with it, but at full lock now, you can see here I'm up above it with that shock mount. So the other thing I did was actually adjust the springs. So I put the soft springs in the front. So right now it doesn't necessarily look any lower, but you know, once you compress it and let it kind of raise up on its own, it's going to sit a lot lower, I believe. And of course it'll have the battery weight up here and of course the body weight. So a little bit more kind of pushing these shocks down, but I think right now I'm happy with it. So I think you know what time it is. It's time to get out all those body pieces, take a look at paintwork and detailing. All right, we're finally to the fun stuff. So let's take a quick fly through of the parts and pieces, and then I'll get into kind of the paints and the process. So here's all the kind of the radiator, winch, grill, hood, a nice little inset grill work, and then we've got the tube fenders, a little logo and grill detail, the sliders. We've got the two-tone interior, very nice. And we've got the rear sliders and kind of over fenders, of course the cage, and then we've got the main tub here, little detail, and the inner fenders, the battery tray, and then the windshield and bikini top. So all in all, I think that looks killer, and I cannot wait to see it all together. So let's go through the paints here. So starting off, to prep everything, I washed it and dried it really well, and then I used this fine surface primer in white. And the reason I went with white was because I did some test sprays here, and so these two oranges on the left are actually the same color. The left orange is on a gray primer, and the one to the right of that is on white, which is the actual color I ended up using here. So that is this TS31 bright orange. And then to complement that, I went with this gunmetal for all the tube work. And I think that looks just killer against the orange. So that is this TS38. And then the inner fenders, I'm using this new color, TS82 rubber black, at least new to me. So it's a great kind of underbody, kind of flat black. Going to start using that a little bit more, I think. And then for the interior, I went with TS81, this royal light gray. I just had some of this on hand left over, and I thought again that this light gray went really well with the orange. And then by itself, it looked good, but I thought, you know, let me put in a little extra work here, two-tone this guy out. So ended up using some XF53 I had on hand, this neutral gray. So I did some brush work here on the seats and of course the console. Use a little flat black as well. And then for kind of the inset detailing and the kind of the side mesh grill work, I use this Black It Out detailing liquid. So that's water-based, basically like a panel liner. So you can flow that on. So I actually use that for the panel lines on the doors, on the body, and on the grill. So once that dries, you can come back if there's any overage with like a wet Q-tip and clean it up really easily. So it's a great way to do like little tiny recesses. And then the more you put on, you know, the more layers, you can actually get it to just go black. So that's kind of what I did on the grill here to just make it super, super dark. The only thing you need to do after that, since it's water-based, is come back and seal it in. So I use some of this TS80 flat clear spray over everything, and I think that looks really good. So the grill and the radiator here got the aluminum, and then I came back on both of those and used some of the Black It Out to just pick up some of the fine detail. So I think that grill and the hood looks really nice. But that's basically the overview of the paint process. Nothing super hard, just got to put in the time and effort So much respect for those builders that actually do paint their own kits and don't send them off to other people to have all the fun work done. I think it's pretty satisfying. But anyways, now that we've seen it all, I think it's time to start jumping into these mini screws over here. Got a little micro driver, so let's start seeing if we can get some of this assembled. Definitely going to do a little investigation as far as thinking about where we're going to put electronics, and of course I'm going to do some lighting as well. So let's jump in. Okay, looks like a little progress was made. So got a little bit of the assembly done. Not as much as it looks like. I've got a little bit mocked up here, and the main reason I wanted to do that was to do one final check after these shocks were adjusted in their new position on the front. So we're going to come down to full compression. You can see that servo horn is right under the grill, right in plane with it. So just perfect clearance there. So if we pull this grill and just look at the battery tray, we are about 1.5 millimeters, 2 millimeters. So just perfect. So that little bit of lean and the kind of the modification to that bottom shock mount point did it. So that is perfect right there. So that works out great. So that's checked off. So next on to kind of the assembly here. So the first thing I did was get the interior mounted into the cage. And I went over that in a little more detail in part one, so I'm not going to get into it. I did say I was going to glue and screw the seats in to that cross member. I ended up finding some black 4mm 1.4 hardware, and I'll show a photo of that. So I ended up just screwing those in, and those had a good bite to the seats, so they're not going anywhere. So got that into the cage, and the next thing was looking at this tub. So I did the sliders and then the rear panel on each side in that order. And then once those were on, slid the cage in. And the most difficult part I had with the cage was some alignment here on the rear on these points. So ended up taking out the 6 on the bottom that I'd already tightened down. And I did these first, and then I came back and got those tightened up. But other than that, it went super smooth. And then you see I've just got this tray set in there just to double check everything. So the fenders right here, they just press on right now. So there's no hardware. And then the outer fenders screw through there. So I'm guessing they may expand that a little bit and catch these even more. But it is a good snug fit. I mean, you really do have to square them up and press them on. So once this battery tray gets in there, it gets screwed down to these guys to brace them, and then the fronts get screwed to the frame. So right now I'm going to leave this off because I don't want to attach anything to the frame just yet. The next thing you'll see kind of mocked up, the antenna out the back. I've got the tray in here. I've got some electronics set in here. So started thinking about how I'm going to situate these guys, and it may be based on the length of this motor cable. So I wanted to run both of these guys pointed forward, but it looks like I may have to kind of run them this way, and unfortunately the tray won't cover both of them, but this will allow me to get at the button if I need to. At least this is a preliminary layout. It may change, but that's what I'm thinking, that goes in the back. Then I'll have the battery Velcroed in the front. So because of that, I need to get up to the battery. So I've got just a regular extension here, and then I've got my converter for my 3S here that goes to a little JST. So that's enough length. I've already test fit this to snake under here. So again, that's going to get back there, and then I've got headlights that have to go back there as well. So depending on probably where this ends up, the motor, that may set where this ultimate lives. And then, you know, the servo is probably the cable that's going to set where this guy can mount, because I can't get the servo cable really any longer. And then the lights, I'll custom make those to length most likely. But that's kind of the game plan right there. So Okay, a little more progress has been made. So I was able to get these electronics pointed in the direction I wanted to. So you can see here this motor cable is really setting how far back this ultimate can slide. So basically got it at the edge of the flat portion there, and then lined up my little micro receiver there. As you saw, I got that double-sided in, and I ended up doing the lights first before I got the tub on. And then there's what, 4 screws there at the frame, and then 2 on each, or 1 on each side here, so 6 total for the frame. And then got the fenders attached here, and then the battery tray, 4 screws in there, so everything is secure. Got my wires routed through there. There's my battery cable ready to go, so pretty clean, especially when I get the tray mounted on here. It's not going to cover all of it, but it's going to cover most of it, and it allows the antenna up so it looks like a scale little whip almost, so that's kind of nice. And then the headlights I just had from I think those were a CC hand JLU kit, so they just happen to already be pretty much the length. So anyways, I think now that I've got it all in there, plugged up, got a battery here. So I've got this little, tiny little 3S. So this is a 250 mAh little Galaxy. So this guy fits in, looks like it'll fit multiple ways. You know, I can run it this way. I can tuck it pretty far down in here and still miss the motor. I can get it pretty low in there. So whatever I do, I'm gonna Velcro it. So I think now I'm gonna plug this guy up. So I've got enough slack to kind of get a hold of this somewhat, bring it up. So definitely don't wanna leave the battery in the vehicle all the time. Seems like a bad plan. All right, so we are plugged up and I can get to the button right here. Looks like all the lights are working, so that's good news. We're running. Looks like I'm gonna have to reverse my direction here, the motor, but definitely works. So test complete. So I think now I'll get these fenders on. This is really the last thing coming up to attach to the grill, and then we'll be wrapped up with this guy and looking at wheels and tires, which I've got quite a few fun little options, but we'll get to that in just one second. Well, we are fully assembled, and I gotta say this thing is looking pretty sweet. So got everything mounted up, except of course the bikini top is not mounted. I'm debating on whether I want to run that or not. It seems to cover up a lot of that nice interior, so I may not run that. But one thing I did notice as I was putting the cargo tray on is it had some raised letters, and haven't really given this much attention since I didn't paint it. So I went ahead and highlighted that to match the dark gray of the interior. So I think that worked out nicely. And then as far as the last little bit of installation here, I'll give you a little tip. I initially didn't have the hood on, and I attached these 4 points of this fender, the 2 pivot points of the grill, and then I attached these 2 points of the fender, and the hood would not close. It wouldn't fit on there at all. The grill was leaned back too far. So I took these out, loosened it up, put the hood on there, and then came back and snugged it up. And I mean, it's like a perfect fit. So take your time doing that. And then the other side, you know, of course, went on easily. One little caveat, I did get a little split here at the screw point. As soon as I started to thread that screw through this outer piece, it just split that, spread that apart. So I tried to glue that, but it looks like it may be wanting to split it. I also tried to open this hole up in this outer piece with a pin vise so that screw wasn't putting stress on it. But as far as this whole kit, that one little imperfection, that's pretty good considering this stuff's all plastic. So I can always pull this panel and try to glue that up a little bit better, but you know, I don't think it'll be an issue. And then the last thing here you'll notice is I got these shackles on. Of course I got the winch on, but the shackles are not part of the kit. These are Endura shackles, and I had to do quite a bit of spreading to get those to fit around the mounts on the bumper. And then the holes in those shackle mounts were super small, so I didn't use the 1.5 hardware that comes with these shackles. Ended up using 1.4, just regular SCX24 hardware, and then little micro nuts. So these are both black on the front. Did the same on the rear. What's strange is the rear mounts are even wider, so these guys, they're not as loose fitting. I really had a time. You can see they're kind of flared, but you know, if they're on there, they look good. So if it's got shackle mount points, want to get some shackles on there. So I think that finishes up the body. The only other little note would be this hood. And you know, I said how tight fitting this all was. This hood has some little C-clips up front. These little kind of look like this, and they clip over a little half cylinder. And man, there's nothing to pry this grill outwards, so you can get a fingernail in here and you can pop the hood off easy enough. But the problem was getting it to pop back down there. So I ended up sanding off just a little bit of those. Let's see if I can even get this hood off kind of on camera. But it's a tight fit. So there it pops off, so that wasn't too bad. But you can see these little, let's see if it'll focus here. These little C pieces. So I just took some of that edge off so there wasn't so much for it to clip around. And it's still a really tight fit there. So I'm happy with that. So the only thing that's lacking is the Velcro mount spot for the battery, but we'll get to that probably at the end here. So I think now that I've got everything finished up, we are ready for some wheels and tires. So you can see what I'm saying here. This grill is pulled back, you know, and it wants to be flush. So there's quite a bit of tension when you get this thing snapped in. So you can kind of snap in one edge, and then I can kind of get my finger back here and pull the grill forward and push the hood back and get it to lip over, and it's not going anywhere. That's a secure fit. So anyways, I think we are ready to look at wheels and tires. Well, we're finally at the highlight of every build, at least for me, the wheel and tire selection. So I've got a lot of options here on the table, and that's for good reason. So as you know, this build started, you know, planning stages quite a ways back, and at that point all I had was Super 8 axles, and so I knew I wanted something with 0 to positive offset for a wheel. And I had these Torque little guy wheels on hand, and I'd used the silvers on my cheat code. I really like them, and I knew these would be a good fit for it. So I kind of thought about these, didn't even have a body or color, and then of course I settled on the Ripper, picked out orange first, didn't really have the highlights selected, and the Cyclones came out. And so I picked these up in black and this kind of gray color. I don't know if they call this gray or gunmetal, but I eventually settled on gunmetal for the tube highlights. And this gray started to look really promising for the wheel color. And then of course, like a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, they came out with the Ghost. So I've only had these for maybe a week, and ended up getting these in the same color gray and then a bronze color, which also looks really good. So we'll dig into these and look at the color differences. I think these are a little different kind of gunmetal color than these, but we'll get these out, take a close look, and make a selection. And as you can see, I've got 2 sets of tires. That's because I've got so many wheels here. I'm definitely going to have to do an alternate set. So we're going to pick 2 of these. And then I've got the little guy Trench King, the new big guys, and then for an alternate set, these are the newer Endura crawler tires. I think these are 64s in the new compound. So a good alternate set, about the same exact size I think as these. And then you can see in the background, we're going to put some Crawler Innovation foams in those to get those nice and soft. So I think without further ado, let's cut into these wheels and take a close look at these. Okay. We've got the Torque on the left, the Cyclone in the center, and the Ghost on the right. So I think I've got these lit pretty well. You can get a good idea of the coloring. So I really like the matte finish on these 2 newer ones on the left. Just looks really, really sharp, especially this bronze. That's just killer. Really like the design of the Ghost. That's probably It's probably my favorite, and then the torque is probably my second favorite as far as wheel design. These are both glossy as well as the other one, the silver. So a polished finish on this one. So it is a different hue, I guess, from the other two. They're much more gray. This one's got a little kind of pewter look to it. Also kind of like the white logo here on the outer lip. That's kind of nice. And then the other main difference is the hardware color, black and silver. They're both brass rings. They're both vented. It looks like these two newer ones have a larger vent hole than the originals. See if I can find the vent hole on this so these will focus. So you can see the size difference there. So both of these newer sets have a larger diameter vent hole, but looks like they're all a similar offset, if not the same. But I think it's time to get them on the truck, see what the color looks like with the vehicle, and see what the offsets are. All right, well, I got 4 of them mounted up, and the 2 there in the middle, of course, I don't think those are in the running. I don't think the pewter matches the gunmetal very well. And of course, the bronze were never really intended for this. But those 2 gray, they look like basically a perfect match for that gunmetal. They look really good. So I think my top choice is going to be the Ghost right there on the front. And then potentially that Cyclone on the rear. But we've got 2 more on the other side, the 2 black versions. But first I want to look at the offset here. So these appear to be the same. So if you look at where that rim is on the knuckle, right there, versus this one. So they look to be exactly the same point. So this is a Cyclone, a solid black on the front, and then the polished at the rear. So that's a tough one. There's not a lot of black on it, but black goes with everything. So I think the second choice may be a mystery of these 3. I think if I go black, I'll probably go with this style because of the white logo. Kind of goes with the white logo on the side. But I think for now, first off, I'm going to get the Ghosts mounted up on some Trench Kings and get those on there, see what they look like, and then I'll think on the alternate set. Quick note on these wheels, as you can see, I've got 3 of the faces off. So they only come with 2 screws installed, but man, they are super tight on there. So I almost thought I was gonna have to get a heat gun out to get them off, but I ended up getting 1 off on the last one, so I figured I could get them all off. But the trick is get a good driver that fits well in the head, and make sure you get a lot of pressure so it doesn't come unseated and want to strip. And really put pressure on it as you slowly turn it, and you can break it loose. So otherwise I would use maybe a heat gun to heat it up if you don't have good tools. But man, those are on there a little bit too tight from the factory, I'd say. All right, got one of these Trench Kings mounted up and nice and vented through the wheel. Got that whole Soft Crawler Innovations foam in there, feels really good. Nice, fills it out. So I figured this would be a good time to look at both sets of tires here, and I was wrong. This Angora tire is actually a little bit bigger, at least a little wider, maybe the same height. But nice, good rubber here, not super sticky by any means, but good softness. This one is soft and very sticky, as you can see. So great new compound here from Angora, really like that. A lot stickier than the same smaller tire they offer in this. So I've got both foams out. These Angora foams are pretty stiff, but again, this is a fairly floppy rubber. And then these are a lot nicer foams that come with the Trench Kings. A lot softer than those. But then, of course, we've got these that are quite a bit softer, and of course we get them compressed down to about like that in the tire, so they're not as soft. They've got some pushback which is nice when you get them all bunched up like that. So we're gonna get 3 more built up like this, and then still thinking on the alternate rims. So we'll see what I figure out here in a second. Well, now that I've got this first set mounted up, I think that answers my question. I think gray is the way. These guys look pretty sweet. Like almost a perfect match for that gunmetal gray. I could not be happier with that. So one little thing I had to do was, you can see I've got the scale hubs out here. All of these wheels come with scale hubs. These fit pretty well, better than the ones that came with the torque. And their little adapter also fits this RC four-wheel drive tool. The one that came with the torque, the originals did not. The difference now is none of the wheels actually come with these, but they force you to pick either SCX24 scale hubs or TRX4M scale hubs. So kind of sucks. They kind of force you to pay, you know, $5 or $6 more for hubs. Not that I don't like scale hubs, but these are the type with the hole in the middle. So there is no actual embedded lock nut. So there's nothing to really lock these in. So tightening them down the back, of course, you can always pretty much get those tightened. And I've got, you know, plenty of nice wobble across, and the wheel is perfectly tight on there. If I tighten down the fronts onto the plastic hexes, there wasn't enough wiggle. So now I'm getting it, you can see that side to side. So I had to take off some of that back spacing of the plastic hex. So I just sanded that down a little bit, and that allowed me to get these tightened down. Because if these aren't tightened down, you kind of back them off, then they're just loose because there is no lock nut. So anyways, enough about that. I think, you know, looking at these, I think the gray is definitely what's going to work best. Black just really doesn't do anything for me. The gray just looks so good on these. So I think I'm going to mount up this other set of Cyclones here in gray onto these giant all-terrain crawler tires. So I get these mounted up, and then we'll see what that looks like. And then we still need to get this thing on the scales and kind of see what this build ended up as. Here we are with the second set mounted up, and I gotta say, they look just as good as the first set. So you'll have to let me know in the comments whether you like the Ghost wheels or the Cyclone better, but I think the coloration, both of them work great against the scheme here. So now that we've got both sets set up here, let's look at our kind of final clearances with full articulation here. So that's fully maxed in the back here. 3 big tires. So let's look at the clearance here at the body. So you can see that wheel arch in there, just perfect. So that's what a kit designed around large little guy racing tires looks like. Just great clearances. So let's see what the front end looks like. So that's kind of straight on, full compression, plenty of clearance. I think because of the CVDs and the wider tires, there's going to be a little kiss in there at the fender, because this can tuck in quite a bit with that CVD angle. So great turning. Let's check this way. So just maxed out, it is right at the bumper. You can see that. So just perfect. That bumper is integral to the frame, so it's really tucked. But like I say, great steering angle. Look at that. So I think the only thing left now is to get a battery in it, get it on the scales, and see what our final weight and ratios are. Quick shot of the battery arrangement here. So this is fitting in quite nicely here. So you can see, left a little space to the fender so I can stick this cord down, and of course it's clear of the motor, and then it actually butts up against the motor cables. You can see that black piece there in front of the spur gear, so can't slide into the spur gear. And then on this side it tucks in under that cage brace right there, so it slots in nicely. It actually fit in there pretty well without any Velcro, just having this little rubber band. Didn't really want to move much, but I figured if it takes a tumble, it needs to stay secure. So This will just fold in, and then everything sits well below. You can see the top of that hood line. You know, once these wires are pushed down, that battery is well below the hood line. So that looks like that's going to work out good. So I think we'll get it on a scale now. We've got a full weight in there. All right, got these scales zeroed out. Let's see where we ended up here. And I just left the cyclones on there. I don't think there'll be much of a weight difference in the wheel tire combos. So it looks like we're a little bit heavier on the passenger side, which makes sense because the battery is on that side. So we a little bit more cross weight there. And then we've got a nice little front bias of 54/46. So that's going to definitely work in our favor. So that's not too bad there. 505, not super heavy. Let's flip over here to ounces. So 17.8 ounces. So that's the stats right there. All right, I think it's about time to get this thing plugged up and give it a little tabletop test here. So one thing I did, you notice, is put the Ghost wheels back on there. And in doing that, like, these had already come loose, these scale hubs. So I used the trick that I use on the sleeve nuts or barrel nuts that you have to use on those hex extensions. So I put a O-ring on there, so just like a shock, you know, ball stud O-ring on first, and then put the scale hub and tighten that down, and that puts tension on it, and it allows you to back it off a little to loosen it up more. And these are still tight. I can't, you know, if I really try, I could unscrew it hand tight, but before you just barely turned it and they came loose. So the O-ring is going to keep that tension and basically keep those from wanting to back off. So let's see if I can, I've already Velcroed the battery in here. Man, I'm telling you, that is a tight fit there. Let's get this on. I've got this servo pumped up to 8.4. Got it fully adjusted, so my CVDs are at their max throw. Let's let this guy crawl. Get that control nice and slow. Look at that creep. This is one of my favorite motors. This MOFO RC Nano Beast. Just such a performer, so much power, so much control, and such a small package. Look at that steering angle. Boom. That's insane. I'm going to get this up on a little stand here and check out this steering maybe just a little bit better. Wish I had these headlights on a switch and back weight this just a little bit. Nope. Let's see if I can try that again. May not be enough weight now with that battery in there. But you get the gist. Pretty extreme angle and super fast and tons of torque. So it looks like the bench test is going just fine. Oh, a little too much weight in the cargo bin. Well, it's that time again. We've come to the end of another build. And although that's sad, I am pretty dang happy with the outcome of this one. I've got to say, this little guy ripper kit was probably the best building experience I've had with an SCX24 overall. Just super fun, so much detail, like building a real vehicle, much closer to you know, a scale model that can actually wheel. So man, just such a neat kit. I cannot recommend it enough. And really stoked about all the new wheel offerings that Little Guy keeps pumping out. So I'm very excited to see what the future holds for them, and hopefully they'll come out with some more detailed kits like this. And just doing this one makes me really want to pick up the Ultra 4 and give that kit a try as well. But man, just from the paint scheme to just everything, I mean, just wow, just could not be happier with this thing. So, you know, the only thing that's left is actually get this out and do a little real field testing here. So hopefully I'll get to that fairly soon, and we'll get a running video up hopefully on this guy and see a little more of this bad boy in action. But man, just gorgeous. But I think for now we are wrapped up, and as always, I appreciate you coming along on the build journey and the process. Hopefully you learned a few tips, a few tricks, or at least enjoyed watching me build something. But anyways, until next time, thanks for watching.